They say a man's life is measured in battles, in victories, in scars and medals. Rome taught me that. Rome fed me that. Rome branded that into my bones with every order shouted, every march drilled, every corpse left behind on some forgotten road. I believed it once. I believed a man was the sum of the wars he survived and the enemies he crushed. Then I met a man who let himself be killed. And nothing I had learned about strength, power, or honor made sense ever again. My name is not important. Rome had a name for me, my mother had another, my comrades called me a third. You can call me what history remembers, the centurion, the one with the spear, the one who pierced his side, the one who, in trying to prove he was dead, discovered I had never really lived. I was not born into blood and iron. I was born into dust and hunger. A farmer's son from a nowhere village, with hands meant for plow handles, not spear shafts. My father used to say the sky belongs to the gods and the earth belongs to the men who know how to work it. I believed him. Until the tax collectors came. Until Rome came. Until the grain we grew fed soldiers and senators instead of our own children. My father bent, then broke. My mother bent, then vanished behind tired eyes. I watched them age 20 years in 5. I watched the land that was ours become property of the empire. Rome does not ask. Rome takes. Rome calls it order. I joined the army not out of loyalty, but out of mathematics. One mouth less for my family to feed. One chance in 1,000 to send money back. One road out of a life spent begging the sky for rain only to watch Rome come and collect the harvest. I traded plow for sword, sandals for armor, home for barracks. Turns out, I was good at war. Commanders like men who don't hesitate. The first time I drove steel into a man's chest, I expected to be haunted. Instead, I slept. The second time, I laughed with the others around the fire. The third time, I didn't notice his face. After a while, killing becomes just another motion, like breathing. You don't think about it. You just do it. They made me centurion because I followed orders, shouted loud, and kept my line from breaking. In Gaul, in Syria, on dusty roads and under strange constellations, I learned one thing. Rome respects efficiency, not conscience. I watched villages burn because a governor was offended. I watched men crucified for stealing bread. I watched women sold because some senator's nephew wanted to feel powerful. I watched it all, and I told myself, this is the world. This is order. This is how it has to be. Then they stationed me in Judea. Judea was different. The Jews were different. Everywhere else, men cursed Rome and then bowed anyway. Here, they cursed quietly and prayed loudly. They spoke of one God, not many. A God you couldn't bribe with offerings or flatter with temples. A God who demanded justice. The first time I heard that, I laughed. Justice was something generals talked about in speeches, not something you ever expected to see. But the Jews believed. Deeply, stubbornly, irritatingly. They also believed in a Messiah, a chosen one, a rescuer, a king, some warrior who would ride in, slaughter their enemies, throw us into the sea, and restore their glory. We heard the rumors. We heard the prophecies. We mocked them over wine in the barracks. Then the reports started. A rabbi in Galilee. Crowds gathering. Sick people walking. Blind people seeing. Words like miracles floated up the chain of command, wrapped in the sneer of frightened priests. They wanted Rome to be nervous for them. They wanted us to see what they saw, a threat. Name. I asked a local informant one day, bored, leaning on my spear at the gate. Yeshua, he said. Jesus of Nazareth. The name meant nothing to me then. Just another holy man with followers and enemies. Judea was full of them. They rose, they shouted, they gathered crowds, they were crushed. Rome had a system. You don't fear prophets. You crucify them. Still, there were whispers that made even hardened soldiers tilt their heads. He healed a leper. Demons obey him. He feeds thousands with almost nothing. He speaks as if he knows God. I heard those stories in pieces. In taverns. In market stalls. On patrol. I rolled my eyes, but I listened. Not because I cared about their miracles, but because unrest grows out of belief. A man who can't be ignored becomes a man Rome must control. Then, one night, in the Praetorium, the order came. The priests wanted him dead. Not arrested. Not questioned. Not exiled. Dead. They couldn't kill him themselves, of course. Not openly. They wanted Rome's hands on the hammer. They wanted our authority, our wood, our nails, our hill. They brought him with accusations dripping from their mouths. Blasphemy, sedition, rebellion. King of the Jews, they called him, their voices full of venom. Pilate questioned him. I was there, standing behind the governor's chair, helmet tucked under my arm, spear resting against my shoulder. I watched the rabbi they hated so much. He was thinner than I imagined. Poor man's clothes. Calloused hands. He didn't look like a revolutionary. He looked like every laborer I grew up with. But his eyes were wrong. Not frightened. Not defiant. Not begging. Come. As if none of this surprised him. As if he'd walked into this moment with his eyes open. Pilate found no guilt in him. I could see it in the governor's tight jaw, the way his fingers drummed the arm of his chair. But politics is a kind of crucifixion too. The priests shouted. The crowd roared. Crucify him! Climbed the walls like smoke. Crucifixion was my business. I knew what it took. I knew the weight of the cross, the struggle up the hill, the sound of nails through bone, the gasps, the curses. I had supervised dozens. Criminals, rebels, thieves. Men who spit at us until their tongues swelled. Men who screamed until their voices shredded. But none of them came to their death the way he did. When Pilate handed him over, the cohort did what soldiers do. They turned fear into mockery. They dressed him in a faded robe, pushed a crown of thorns into his scalp. They laughed, bowed, hit him with a reed scepter. Hail, King of the Jews! They jeered. I watched. I didn't stop them. Commanders do not interrupt the rituals that keep their men from breaking. But there was a moment, just a moment, when he lifted his head and looked past them. Past the soldiers. Past the blood. Past the laughter. At me. And for a heartbeat, it felt like standing under a storm and realizing the lightning had found your name. I looked away. I was a centurion of Rome. I commanded men. I enforced law. I killed without trembling. I did not flinch under the gaze of condemned men. But I flinched under his. I pushed the feeling down. Feelings do not matter on execution days. Orders do. The hill had already been chosen. The wood already prepared. The nails already counted. My job was simple. Get him there. Get it done. Make sure he's dead. I didn't know then that in carrying out that last part, proving his death, I would see something that made everything inside me shift. I didn't know I would be the man who pierced not just his side, but the sky itself. I walked closer to the cross because that was my duty, but something in me resisted with every step. I had executed dozens of men in my years of service, rebels, thieves, deserters, but never had my own feet hesitated like that. The other soldiers expected me to be precise, a simple thrust beneath the ribcage, angled up toward the heart. Quick, definitive, Roman. But as I stood beneath him, something inside me recoiled, not from the violence, but from the strange stillness that surrounded his body. He looked peaceful, not in the way some men collapse from exhaustion and surrender to death. No, his stillness felt deliberate, chosen. Even in death, his face carried the quiet authority of someone who had not been defeated, only completed. It unsettled me. Men died fighting. Men died begging. But he died like he was returning home. My hand tightened on the spear. Rome did not tolerate doubt. If a condemned man showed any sign of life and we reported him dead, the punishment was ours to bear. So I lifted the spear, ignoring the tremor that betrayed me. I pushed the iron point between his ribs with practiced precision. But what flowed out did not belong to the world I knew. Blood, yes, but also water, a clear stream as if drawn from some hidden spring inside him. It spilled warm over my hand, and for one suspended moment I could not breathe. I had pierced hundreds of bodies. I knew how blood behaved. But this was not the response of a broken human body. This felt like a sign. Something sacred disguised as a wound. The other soldiers staggered back, muttering curses and prayers in the same breath. One of them whispered that the gods were angry. Another said that the earth had groaned when Jesus died. But I heard none of it. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the soft trickle of that impossible mixture soaking into the ground. I looked up into his face. Dead men do not look aware. They do not look patient. They do not look like they are waiting. Yet something about his expression made me feel as though he had known exactly who would pierce him, and when and why. As if he had been waiting for that final blow, not as a cruelty, but as a fulfillment. When I stepped back, the sky felt heavier. The air tasted different, metallic and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. I wiped my hand on my cloak, but the warmth remained, clinging to my skin as if it had seeped inside me. I felt exposed, seen, judged, and yet somehow forgiven all at once. Rumors spread fast among the men, the temple veil tearing, graves opening, shadows moving across the hills. The centurion himself, a hardened man who had witnessed every horror war could offer, whispered, "Truly this was the Son of God." And those words pierced me deeper than my spear had pierced him. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the barracks staring at my hand, half expecting it to still glow with that impossible warmth. I remembered his silence, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of someone who had stepped willingly into a place none of us could follow. I replayed the moment over and over again, each time feeling something in my chest tighten, then crack, then shift. It felt like the beginning of something I was not prepared to face. I had pierced him to confirm his death. Instead, he had pierced me with something far more dangerous: the truth. Sleep refused to come to me after that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment my spear entered his side, the way the blood and water flowed, the warmth on my hand, the strange sense that something holy had passed through me. I had seen men die on battlefields, executed by my own orders, torn by beasts in the arenas, but never had death looked like that. Never had a corpse left me feeling as though I had been the one exposed, the one judged. The city was restless. People whispered in the streets about the darkness that swallowed the sky when he breathed his last. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Merchants closed stalls early. Even the temple priests walked with an unease they tried to hide behind layers of authority. And among the soldiers, there was a tension I had never felt before. Fear not of rebellion, but of the possibility that Rome had crucified someone it could not understand, could not control, could not silence. The commander summoned me at dawn to report to the priests and confirm the death officially. Procedure demanded it, but there was urgency behind it. Fear disguised as bureaucracy. When I arrived at the tomb, I found priests arguing in hushed voices, faces pale beneath their ornate garments. They demanded details, every detail, as if each word I spoke might either condemn them or save them. "Did he show any signs of life?" one priest asked. "No." "And the wound? You pierced the heart." "Yes." "And what came out?" His voice trembled. I hesitated, not because I doubted what I saw, but because I feared what it meant to speak it aloud. "Blood," I said slowly. "And something like water." The reaction was immediate. A flicker of dread crossed his eyes. Not surprise, but recognition. As though this was something he had read, something he had expected, something he wished he hadn't been right about. He dismissed me quickly, but not before whispering to another priest, their words sharp and urgent. Prophecy, fulfillment, sacrifice. I wasn't meant to hear them, but I did. And every syllable carved deeper into me. As I walked back through the streets, the world felt heavier. Children stared as if they sensed something clinging to me. Women crossed to the other side of the road. Even my fellow soldiers looked at me as though I carried a curse. I tried washing the hand that had touched his blood, but the warmth lingered beneath the skin. A memory, a mark, a warning. I tried to rationalize it. Bodies do strange things when they die. Pressure builds. Fluids shift. But no explanation eased the burning question in my mind. Why did it feel as if the moment I pierced him, he had pierced something in me? That night, the barracks echoed with rumors, some absurd, some terrifying. The veil in the temple torn from top to bottom. Graves opening. The dead walking. Earth shaking. Soldiers who prided themselves on skepticism spoke these things with trembling voices. No one laughed. No one dared. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the storm inside me. But the more I tried, the louder it grew. I replayed his face, serene even in death. The sky turning black. The ground groaning beneath us. The centurion's voice cracking as he declared him the Son of God. A thought formed inside me, unwanted but impossible to dismiss. If he truly was who they claimed, then my spear had not merely confirmed a death. It had completed a prophecy. And then came the fear that I had not killed a criminal, but touched something sacred. Something alive, even in death. Something that was not finished with me. I spent the next day moving like a ghost through the fortress, present in body, absent in everything else. My commander barked orders, and I obeyed, but I heard him through water. The men gambled, laughed, argued, but their voices felt distant, like echoing fragments from a life I no longer belonged to. Something had changed inside me since the moment my spear entered him. Something irreversible. Not guilt alone. Guilt I knew well. This was different. It felt like a mirror had been turned toward me for the first time, and I hated what I saw. At midday, the centurion who had overseen the crucifixion called me aside. A veteran, a man whose nerves had been tempered by decades of bloodshed, he spoke in a low, uneasy tone. "Keep watch on the tomb," he said. "The priests fear his followers will attempt something. Theft. Tricks. A false resurrection." He tried to sound dismissive, but I could see the strain in his jaw. He had been there. He had seen the sky rip open. He had felt the earth tremble beneath his boots. He had whispered words he could not take back. Truly this was the Son of God. And once that sentence escaped his mouth, he had been unable to swallow the truth it carried. Night watch at the tomb should have been simple, but nothing about that place felt simple. The garden was quiet. Too quiet. Even the insects seemed hesitant, as if the air itself held its breath. The stone sealing the entrance looked heavy enough to anchor a ship, and still the priests insisted on ropes and seals and guards. If this had been any other execution, they would have walked away without a second thought. But this man, dead as he was, frightened them more than anyone alive ever had. I stood there in the dark, spear in hand, staring at the stone. My thoughts spun like a wheel that refused to stop turning. I remembered his eyes, not desperate or frightened, but full of a strange sorrow that felt directed at me personally, as though he had known everything I had ever done. Every man I'd executed. Every cruelty I'd accepted as survival. Every compromise my soul had swallowed until it no longer tasted the difference between duty and wickedness. And yet, there had been something in his gaze that felt nothing like condemnation. It felt like mourning, as if he grieved for me. I shook my head, trying to banish the thought. I was a soldier, a Roman, a servant of Caesar, not some trembling zealot who jumped at shadows. And yet doubt gnawed at me like an animal refusing to die. I thought of his followers, the women sobbing at the foot of the cross, the one disciple who stayed when all the others fled, the mother whose grief pierced me more deeply than my own spear ever could. They had looked at him not like a leader, but like someone they loved beyond reason. Someone they trusted with their very breath. How could so many place such impossible faith in a man? Unless he was more than a man. A wind cut across the garden, cold enough to raise every hair on my arms. I tightened my grip on the spear. My mind kept replaying the moment the blood and water touched my hand. That warmth, that unnatural surge that felt like it had chosen me. I had tried to wash it off, to scrub until my skin stung, but the feeling lingered beneath the surface like a stain the water could not reach. The other guards whispered that strange things happened around this man, that even his corpse unsettled the world. One claimed he heard faint tremors beneath the earth as he passed the tomb. Another said he felt a vibration in the air like the deep hum before a storm. I mocked them aloud, but inside, a single terrifying thought kept rooting itself deeper. What if death itself could not hold him? If that was true, if even the grave bowed to him, then what did that make me? Not just a soldier doing his duty, not just a man with blood on his hands, but the instrument of something far beyond my understanding, far beyond Rome, far beyond anything my life had prepared me to face. The night stretched on, thick and heavy. The moon slipped behind clouds, and darkness deepened until I could barely see my own hands. I stood there listening, to the wind, to the silence, to the faint rhythm of my own heartbeat. And beneath it all was a sense I could not explain, a sense that the world was not as still as it appeared, that something was building, gathering, waiting. I had pierced his side. But what had pierced me was far more dangerous. The possibility that everything I had ever believed about power, about gods, about dying, about destiny, was wrong. And that everything began and ended with the man inside that tomb. I barely recognized myself the next morning. My armor felt heavier, as if every plate carried the weight of questions I couldn't silence. I strapped it on anyway. Roman habits cling to a man longer than truth does. The men around me joked, sharpened blades, kicked dust at each other, but their laughter sounded wrong to my ears, hollow and strained. I wondered if they, too, were pretending. If the darkness that swallowed the sky when he died still lived in their minds like it lived in mine. Orders came quickly. Rotate the guards at the tomb, reinforce the seal, ensure no one got close. The priests hovered nearby, wringing their hands, their voices pitched too high for men who claimed certainty. They feared his followers, yes, but they feared him more. The dead should not command such authority. And yet every breath they took seemed shaped by their terror of what that tomb might become. When I approached the garden, a strange tension pulled at the air. It felt charged, alive, like the moment before a storm breaks open the sky. The guards stationed there looked pale, their hands trembling as they tightened their grips on their weapons. "Nothing to report," one said, but the words rang false. I had seen that look on soldiers who'd heard wolves in the dark, trying to convince themselves they had imagined it. I dismissed them and took my post. The stone towered over me, sealed, silent, immovable. I pressed my palm against it, expecting cold hardness. Instead, I felt something. Not movement, not sound, but an energy humming behind the surface, faint but undeniable. I jerked my hand away, swallowing hard. The world may not have changed, but I had. And now I felt things I had never allowed myself to feel before. I paced the perimeter, trying to break the strange hold the tomb had on me, but my mind drifted where my feet could not. I thought of his mother, her tears falling like offerings at the foot of the cross. I thought of the disciple who stayed, shoulders shaking with helpless devotion. I thought of the women who followed him even in death. They had lost everything, yet still they waited. Still they loved him. Still they believed. What kind of man earned loyalty like that? Not a rebel, not a zealot, not a criminal. Something far more powerful, far more terrifying. The priests insisted he was a threat to Rome, a threat to the temple, a threat to order itself. But I had seen threats. I had killed threats. And the man on that cross had not looked like someone fighting to overthrow the world. He looked like someone trying to save it. The thought cut deeper than any blade could. My life, my entire identity, was built on strength, dominance, control. Rome rewarded loyalty and punished weakness. But the man I had pierced radiated a different kind of strength, one I could neither command nor understand. Not brute force, not fear. Something purer, something that made me feel seen, in the way no god of Rome ever had. My chest tightened, and I pressed my hand against the spot as if I could hold myself together. I could not stop thinking of the blood and water that flowed from him, warm and alive. I had felt something in that moment, something that refused to let me go. Guilt, yes, but also an invitation, as if the wound I gave him had opened something in me in return. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the sky, but the unease in the air did not fade. The garden felt like the world was waiting for a command it had already heard but had not yet obeyed. When night returned, the silence thickened. I sat near the tomb, my spear across my knees, staring into the darkness. I should have felt tired. I should have felt numb. But instead, I felt alert, as if every sense in my body had awakened to something I could not name. I closed my eyes, hoping for a moment of rest, and immediately saw his face. Not broken and bleeding, not hanging lifeless, but alive, looking at me, not with judgment, not with condemnation, with understanding. I jolted awake, breath ragged. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't shake the image, couldn't dismiss it as a dream. It felt too real, too intimate, too much like a message meant only for me. I rose to my feet, pacing. The garden was still. The guards breathed softly in restless sleep. The moon stood high, cold and unblinking. And then, without warning, a chilling certainty settled over me. Heavy, undeniable, absolute. Something was coming. Something beyond Rome. Beyond death. Beyond every law written by men. And I was standing closer to it than anyone alive. I felt the first tremor just after midnight, not in the ground, but in my chest, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. The air shifted, subtle at first, then sharply, as if the garden itself inhaled. I rose to my feet without thinking. My hand went to my spear out of habit, but even before my fingers closed around the shaft, I knew no weapon forged by men would matter for what was coming. The guards around me stirred uneasily, muttering in their sleep, turning from side to side as if trapped inside nightmares too heavy to escape. The breeze died. The leaves stilled. Even the insects fell silent. And then the earth moved. Not violently, not the way it had when he died, but with a deep, resonant pulse that traveled through my legs and into my spine. The kind of movement that felt like the world waking up, not breaking apart. I staggered, steadying myself against a tree, my breath catching in my throat. The guards jolted awake, scrambling for their weapons, shouting questions into the dark. But there were no answers. Only that tremor, rising from the ground like a warning. I turned toward the tomb, and every drop of blood in my veins froze. Light, faint at first, just a thin, impossible glow leaking from behind the edges of the stone. Not fire, not torchlight. Something purer, white, but not cold. Bright, but not blinding. It flickered like the first breath of dawn struggling against the night. The guards saw it too. One dropped his shield. Another fell to his knees. A third whispered a prayer to gods who had never answered him. I stepped forward because something drew me, something that felt like the echo of his gaze on the cross. My feet moved without my permission, pulled by a force I cannot describe. Fear battled awe in my chest, but awe drowned it quickly. I knew instinctively, this was not dangerous, not to the soul, at least. Only to the lies we built around ourselves. A wind rose suddenly, swirling around the stone, lifting dust and leaves in a spiral that shimmered in the strange white glow. The ground trembled a second time, stronger. The stone shuddered. The rope strained. And then the world changed. A force, not violent but immense, pushed outward from inside the tomb. The stone shifted, scraping across the earth with a sound that seemed to split the air itself. The guards screamed. Some fled. Others collapsed. One shielded his face with both arms, sobbing like a child. But I stood. Not because I was braver, but because I could not move. My legs wouldn't obey. My breath wouldn't come. My heart wouldn't decide whether to break or to rise. The light grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Once, twice, then bursting outward in a wave that swept across the garden like a tide of fireless flame. It passed through me, not around me, not over me, through me. Warm, clean, consuming and gentle all at once. I gasped, dropping my spear as my knees nearly buckled. For a moment I felt weightless, suspended between the world I knew and a world I could not understand. I should have run. Any sane man would have. But instead I whispered, "What are you?" Not who. What? Because no human, no prophet, no king, no rebel could command the earth, silence the night, and loosen the grip of death. The light faded slowly, not dying, but settling, like a fire choosing to glow instead of burn. The stone now lay to the side, as if pushed by a giant's hand. The entrance of the tomb was open. Darkness should have lurked inside, but instead I saw a faint radiance, warm and golden like the inside of a lamp held close to the chest. My hands trembled as I stepped closer. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. Every memory told me I should fear judgment. But another voice, the one that had begun whispering the moment blood and water touched my hand, pushed me onward. The world around me disappeared. The guards, the trees, the night. All of it blurred. All I saw was the open tomb. All I felt was the impossible truth pressing against my chest. Death had not taken him. Death had yielded to him. And I understood, terrifyingly, beautifully, that the moment I pierced his side had not been the end of a story. It had been the beginning of one that had just stepped out of the tomb. I stepped toward the tomb because something inside me demanded it. Not curiosity, not duty, but a pull so deep it felt older than my own breath. The guards were gone now, scattered like frightened animals into the night. Their shields lay abandoned in the dust. Their helmets rolled into the olive bushes as if the earth itself had shaken them loose. I should have run with them. I should have fled from the impossible. But instead, I walked toward it. The air around the tomb felt charged, the way the sky feels moments before lightning slices it open. Every hair on my arms stood on end. My heart hammered, not from fear of danger, but from a deeper fear, fear of truth. Fear of what I would see. Fear that everything I had ever believed would collapse into ash the moment I stepped inside. I crossed the threshold. The glow that had spilled out earlier had softened now, like embers settling after a great fire. The tomb smelled of stone and linen and something else. Something clean. Something alive. My eyes adjusted slowly, and then I saw it. The linen that had wrapped his body lay neatly folded, placed with care rather than torn in panic. No struggle. No theft. No deception. Whatever had happened here had been deliberate. I froze. My body would not move. My breath escaped me in small, trembling gasps. I had seen death 100 times. I had caused it more times than I will ever be brave enough to count. Bodies do not vanish. Corpses do not stand and walk away. Stones do not roll themselves. Graves do not shine with living light. But his grave had. My hand, the same hand that had pierced his side, throbbed with memory, warm, alive, as if echoing the very pulse that had left his body when I struck him. I held it to my chest, trying to steady myself, but instead I felt a pressure inside me, growing like a rising tide. A longing. A breaking. A recognition. I whispered into the silence. "What have you done?" But the question was wrong. Even as the words left my lips, I knew it. The right question, the one clawing its way up my throat, was far more dangerous. "What have you undone?" I knelt, not out of reverence, not out of fear, but because my legs refused to hold me upright any longer. The tomb felt different now. Not empty. Never empty. Filled with purpose, with presence, with him, somehow. As if the space still remembered his body, but also remembered the moment he rose from it. I stared at the folded cloths, unable to look away. They were a declaration without a single word spoken. He had left them behind because he was finished with death. He had stepped out of these linens like a man shedding the last remnants of night before walking into morning. I pressed my forehead to the cold stone. My breath shuddered through me. My soul wrenched in my chest. I felt unmade, undone, stripped bare. Every sin, every cruelty, every order I had obeyed without question pressed against me like weights I had spent a lifetime ignoring. But instead of crushing me, something else happened, something I cannot explain. The tomb felt like mercy, raw, radiant, unexplained, a mercy that terrified me more than any judgment ever could. I stumbled backward, out into the garden, gasping for air. The wind brushed against me, cool and soft, as if the night itself had changed texture, as if creation had shifted alignment in the span of a heartbeat. I no longer felt alone. I no longer felt like a soldier standing guard over a dead rebel. I felt watched, not by eyes of flesh, but by eyes that had looked through death and returned. I gripped the spear with both hands, shaking violently. It was useless now. A relic of a life I no longer recognized. The weapon that had once felt like an extension of myself now felt foreign, heavy, wrong. Because for the first time in my life, I realized the truth. The man I pierced had been telling the truth all along. And I had pierced not the body of a criminal, but the body of the one who had just conquered death itself. My knees gave way. My breath left me. I understood. Everything I had been, everything I had believed, everything I had trusted, had just shattered. And in the ruins, one terrifying, glorious certainty rose. He was not dead. He was not gone. He was alive. And he would not leave the world the way he found it. Least of all, me. I didn't leave the garden immediately. My body tried to move, but something held me there, as if the earth beneath my feet refused to release me until I understood what had truly happened. The night sky stretched above, but it no longer felt like the same sky that had watched me raise my spear against him. It felt larger, deeper, alive in a way that made the air vibrate against my skin. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound clearer. The world had not just shifted, it had awakened. I stumbled toward an olive tree and pressed my back against the trunk, gasping as though I'd run a great distance. The bark scraped my armor, grounding me, anchoring me, reminding me that I still belonged to flesh and bone, even though something inside me no longer felt entirely human. I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind them wasn't empty. It pulsed with images, his face on the cross, serene and knowing, the spear entering his side, the rush of blood and water, the tomb glowing from within. The stone moving without human hands. Light, warm and alive, passing through me like fire that refused to burn. Every image carried a question I could no longer ignore. Why me? Why had I been the one chosen to pierce him? Why had I been the one standing closest when the tomb opened? Why had the light touched me as though it recognized me? I was a soldier, a killer, a man whose hands had ended more lives than he had ever saved. If there was anyone unworthy of witnessing something holy, it was me. And yet I had been placed there, positioned like a piece on a board by a player whose strategy one did not understand. My heart thudded violently, echoing in my ears. I pressed a hand to my chest, half expecting to feel a wound there, but there was nothing. Just skin, armor, and a heartbeat that no longer felt like mine alone. I thought of the priests and their terror, of Pilate washing his hands, of the crowd screaming for his blood, of the other soldiers mocking him, spitting insults, driving the nails through his wrists. And then I thought of myself, standing below him, spear in hand, fulfilling a prophecy I didn't know existed. My entire life had been obedience. To Rome, to commanders, to violence. I had believed in power because power was the only thing that kept a man alive. But in that garden, I realized something far more terrifying. All the power I had ever trusted was nothing. Fragile, hollow, worthless in the face of someone who could step from death as easily as a man steps from a doorway. A rustle broke the silence. I looked up sharply. Two figures approached, moving quickly through the garden, women. I recognized them from the crucifixion. They had stood there as he died, refusing to look away even when the rest of his followers fled. Their faces were streaked with tears, but their steps were urgent, driven by grief and love. They carried spices, burial cloths, hopes of tending to a body that no longer lay in the tomb. I pressed deeper into the shadows, unsure whether to reveal myself. If they saw a Roman standing near the open tomb, they would scream. They would assume the worst, that we had taken him, hidden him, stolen his body. And I had no words that could convince them otherwise. No explanation that would make sense. They reached the tomb and froze. One dropped her jar of spices, the clay shattering on the stones. The other clutched her cloak, trembling. They stared at the opening, whispering his name through broken sobs. I watched, hidden, as they stepped inside. Moments later they stumbled out, eyes wide, faces pale, breathless with something beyond fear. Not terror, not despair, wonder, hope. A wild, impossible hope that lit their faces like dawn breaking through night. "He's gone," one whispered. "No," the other said, her voice trembling with awe. "He's risen. Risen." The word struck me like a blade made of light. Not because it was new, but because I had felt the truth of it before they even spoke it. Because the light that had passed through me was not the light of a tomb opening. It was the light of a life returned. The women ran from the garden to tell the others, their footsteps fading into the darkness. I remained where I stood, unable to move, unable to breathe. My hands shook violently. My knees buckled. And then, for the first time in my life, I wept. Not from fear, not from pain, but from a truth so enormous it shattered me. He had risen. The man I pierced had risen. And suddenly I understood why my hand had felt warm. Why the light had moved through me. Why the tomb felt like mercy instead of judgment. The spear had not condemned me. It had called me, not to death, but to him. I remained in the garden long after the women disappeared into the awakening city. My tears had dried on my cheeks, leaving thin, salty lines that tightened my skin. But inside, nothing felt dry. Everything churned. Fear, awe, shame, longing, spinning so violently that I could barely breathe. I pressed both hands against the tree behind me, grounding myself as the world around me shifted into something unfamiliar, something holy. The sky began to pale at the edges, morning creeping forward with slow, cautious steps. I had watched hundreds of sunrises as a soldier, but never like this. Never with the crushing awareness that the world I had known was already dead, and something new was rising with the light. I stared at the horizon, but all I could see was the tomb behind me, glowing faintly in my memory like a wound that refused to close. My legs trembled when I finally forced myself to stand. The garden felt different, lighter, softer, as though creation itself sighed with relief after holding its breath for 3 days. The air tasted new, clean, sharp with possibilities I had never dared to imagine. I should have returned to the fortress immediately, reported the disappearance of the body, sounded the alarm. But every instinct inside me resisted. No part of me wanted to return to Rome's commands. No part of me wanted to lie. No part of me wanted to deny what I knew, what I had seen. I was still a soldier in uniform, but I no longer felt like Rome owned me. Not after this. I moved through the olive trees like a man learning to walk again. Each step felt foreign, heavy and light at the same time. I found the road leading out of the garden and stopped, staring at Jerusalem's walls. Smoke rose from early cooking fires. Merchants prepared their stalls. Children carried baskets. Life continued, as though the most important moment in history had not just unfolded in a silent, hidden garden. And I wondered how many of them would understand the truth. How many would dismiss it? How many would deny it? My heart ached with a realization deeper than any spear thrust. They would chase rumors, argue, deny, invent explanations. They would accuse his followers. They would accuse us soldiers. They would accuse anyone except the one truth their hearts feared most, that death itself had surrendered. A voice echoed from the main road. Shouts, hurried footsteps. I ducked behind a low wall, instinct returning for the first time since the tomb opened. 2 temple guards ran past, sweat streaking their foreheads, terror in their voices. The body is gone. They will blame us. They will kill us for this. Their panic hit me like a blow. They had not seen what I had seen. They had not felt the light pass through them. They had not been touched by what had woken in that tomb. Their fear made sense. But mine was different now. It was not fear of punishment. It was fear of purpose. I stepped onto the road slowly, watching the guards vanish around the corner. I could still flee. I could still pretend none of it had happened. Rome allowed cowards as long as they obeyed. But something deeper, older, stronger whispered inside me. You cannot return to who you were. Not after witnessing eternity. I walked back toward the city, heart pounding. Each step felt like I was leaving behind the man who had lifted the spear, trading him for someone I did not yet understand. I passed the marketplace, ignored the vendors, ignored the suspicious stares. My uniform drew attention, but I walked as if deaf to the world. I reached a small alley and leaned against the wall, bowing my head as the realization finally struck me, not like a gentle thought, but like a thunderclap. If he was alive, then I might see him again. And the thought terrified me. Not because I feared punishment, but because I feared what he would see when he looked at me. The man I was. The choices I made. The blood on my hands. And then, uninvited, the memory returned. The moment at the cross when his eyes, clouded with pain and shadowed by death, still held something that felt like compassion. Compassion. For me. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat stutter beneath my armor. I whispered into the empty alley, my voice breaking. If you are alive, then tell me what you want from me. The wind shifted, warm against my face. It was barely a breeze, gentle, passing, insignificant to anyone else. But to me, it felt like an answer. Not in words, not in sound, in the simple, impossible feeling that I was no longer alone inside my own skin. That he had risen, and that somehow, impossibly, he had taken me with him. I didn't return to the fortress until the sun was fully risen, and even then, every step felt like a confession. My armor clinked softly with each movement, a sound that once represented order and authority but now felt like chains from a life I no longer believed in. The closer I got to the city gates, the stronger the weight in my chest grew. Not fear of punishment, not dread of discipline, but the crushing awareness that I was walking back into a world that could no longer contain the truth I carried. A truth too large, too holy, too alive to be hidden beneath a soldier's uniform. By the time I crossed into Jerusalem, guards were already shouting to one another. Rumors spilled from every doorway like smoke. The tomb was empty, the body was gone, the priests were in panic. Fear radiated through the streets, not the fear of rebellion or violence, but the fear of something unexplainable. People clung to each other, speculating wildly. Some blamed grave robbers. Some blamed the disciples. Some whispered of angels and earthquakes. And some, very few, whispered that perhaps everything he had said was true. I walked through it all, unseen and yet exposed, as though the truth inside me blazed brightly enough to burn through my armor. The fortress erupted when I entered. Officers shouted questions before I even removed my helmet. What happened at the tomb? Where were you? Who moved the stone? What do you know? Their voices hammered at me, but all I heard was the distant echo of his silence on the cross, the peace that radiated from his lifeless body, and the light that had poured from the tomb like dawn exploding. I answered nothing at first. My throat refused sound. How could I speak of what I had seen? How could I confess that death had unraveled before my eyes and surrendered itself to a man I had pierced? They would call me mad. They would chain me. They might kill me. But worse than all of that was the thought that I might speak carelessly of something so sacred that even the air in the garden had held its breath. Finally the commander grabbed my shoulder, pulling me aside, his eyes sharp with desperation. Soldier, tell me the truth. Did you see his followers? I met his gaze with a steadiness I did not feel. No. Then who moved the body? He demanded. I opened my mouth. The truth rose like a tide, but I swallowed it. Not out of fear for my life, but out of reverence. What I had witnessed did not belong to men who sought only control. It did not belong to Rome. It did not belong to priests hungry for power. It belonged to him, and to those he chose to reveal himself to. So I simply said, no one touched the tomb. The commander recoiled as if I had struck him. Impossible. But the word impossible meant nothing now. It had lost all power the moment the stone rolled away without hands. He dragged me before the temple leaders. Their faces were pale, their robes disheveled, their voices sharp with panic disguised as authority. They questioned me for what felt like hours, circling me like wolves afraid of their prey. Who stole the body? What did you witness? What did the guards see? They offered bribes. They offered threats. They offered explanations they begged me to believe. But none of their stories came close to the truth, and none of their lies could quiet the memory of the women's faces glowing with impossible hope. At last, one of the older priests leaned forward, his voice trembling. Soldier, if you saw something, you must report it. Rome will protect you. Rome had never protected my soul. Rome had taught me to kill, not to recognize God when he stood before me. So I said the only thing I could say without betraying the truth. The tomb was sealed. The stone was heavy. The guards were armed. And yet, he was gone. The priest's face twisted. Gone. Gone where? I didn't answer. Because deep in my chest, beneath the fear and the guilt and the awe, I already knew the answer. Not where. To whom? He had risen, and he had gone to those he loved. They dismissed me, fearful of my silence. I was ordered back to my quarters. Ordered not to speak. Ordered not to think. But how does a man unsee light? How does he forget the warmth of mercy? How does he pretend he did not stand at the fault line where eternity broke into the world? I removed my armor piece by piece, setting it on the floor like shedding a former life. The spear I had carried for years, the spear that had pierced him, I laid gently beside it. I stared at the iron tip, remembering the moment it entered his side, remembering the warmth on my hand, remembering how I felt something inside me collapse and rebuild in a single heartbeat. Then I did something I had not done since I was a child. I knelt, not before Rome, not before a commander, not out of fear, but out of surrender. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I prayed, not to the gods of marble and silence, but to the man whose eyes had held the universe even as he hung dying. And in that quiet room, with my armor at my feet and the morning sun rising beyond the window, I whispered the only words I had left. I pierced your side, but you pierced my heart. If you can forgive a man like me, then show me who I am now. And in the stillness, I felt it. Not shame, not judgment. A presence, a warmth, a calling. The tomb was empty, and so was I, which meant he could finally fill me.